You're listening to When God Intervenes, the podcast where faith, hope, and healing come together for families with a loved one battling addiction. Hey, everybody. I'm back. My name is Darryl Rodgers. I am the host of When God Intervenes. Welcome to another episode. And I have with me today Steve Ward. First of all, where are you?
Well, after a much traveled journey over the decades, we live in Birmingham, Alabama now, and have been for about 10 years. And as far as we can tell, we'll be here for the duration.
Yeah, I think I shared with you, I've been through Birmingham quite a few times, just in my travels over the years. And it's been a little while now, but yeah, I always like traveling through that area. I was just reading a little bit about you, and I know you've had some personal struggles in your past with addiction and or substance use. Why don't you just start out telling us a little bit about your story and kind of took you down that path and how you've come through that whole journey and how God has led you through that into the type of work that you're doing now.
Well, my personal journey was likely like many people. High school, comfortable in part of my identity. I was pretty good in school, but there was another part of identity I wanted, right? There was a problem I wanted to solve. I wanted to be cool and connected and calm and fit in with, the cool crowd and be clever enough so that pretty girls would be attracted to me. And found out that alcohol seemed to help me address that, right? People do what they do for a reason. So I chose that as a less than profound coping mechanism and carried that into college. I went to Georgia Tech, but I did well, but I was really kind of more focused. That had now become part of how I dealt with life. And then, after school, I started with IBM and wound up staying with them for 38 years. By now, right, and I was good at work. I was dedicated to it. I had now, acquired alcohol as a way to deal with life, right? So you probably know, and many others, right? When you use alcohol or drugs, you get very clever about building a rationalization for why it's okay for you to do what you want to do. My rationalization was, hey, if I'm good at work in other parts of life, why not? Work hard, play hard. If I come home, I deserve to relax. But alcohol was an addiction for me and an idol in my life. And for a long time, I just refused to accept that. It became more of a struggle for me to deal with as I got older. Perhaps one of the things that perpetuated a little bit is that my favorite drinking buddy happened to be my wife in this case, right? So she wound up struggling with alcohol as well. And things got darkest when our oldest son got into middle school. And we had moved to another city, and he chose a crowd that, again, sometimes things repeat themselves in life, but he wanted to hang out with the cool crowd. And he picked a group of people who were making some bad choices and went down a path that for about 10 years involved drugs and alcohol. And it got very, very dark. So through all of that, I was exposed to the world of recovery for myself, but also as a
Mhm.
dad and as a husband. And interestingly, I enjoyed it. I found recovery fascinating and interesting, and I learned a lot. And the epiphanies I faced in that period, I think, led me to change my life and lead me to do what I do now.
That's interesting that you've been on both sides of the equation, both as a person struggling with alcohol, struggling with substance use, and as a parent
Yeah.
of a child, with that issue. And you're right, it is fascinating. It's a really, the more I've dived into it and learned, the more see opportunity for spiritual growth. It seems like pain quite often is an impetus for growth for a lot of us. Sometimes we need that little extra motivation to dive in and do the work that we need to do and to, develop that deeper relationship with God to allow Him to come into our lives and transform us. Life is just hard. Life is hard, at times it can be. It can be very challenging. A lot of different things come up for people, and we all feel stress and we feel like, oh, we're all looking for a coping mechanism that how can I deal with these stresses? But a lot of people also have some type of serious trauma from their past, things like that, that's maybe an underlying issue for them that leads them into substance use. Was that the case for you, or is it just more just the stresses of life and just trying to
Yeah.
fit in and
Well, I actually like being asked that question because I don't know if my story is much different from other people. In many ways, it's similar, but we all have our own journey, I guess.
Mhm.
But when I first started doing what I do now, I founded a nonprofit that works on helping people live life better and actually prevent addiction and behavioral health issues. But when I started that, I used to tell my story, and I would just talk about being an alcoholic and addiction, and other people would nod politely and have gentle empathy because I was now in that category of which they were not a member, right? They saw alcoholics and addicts as another group of people. And along the way, I started occasionally using the words high functioning alcoholic. And then all of a
Mm.
sudden I noticed, well, a lot of people would say, well, what do you mean by high functioning alcoholic? Or I didn't know you could be one if you were still good at work. Or what does it mean? In other words, a lot more people became interested in it because the world tends to put people in categories, right?
Uh-huh.
And it becomes a stigma, right? That they label alcoholics and addicts as those people who don't have their act together, unlike me, right? Whereas the fact of the matter is, I'm a firm believer that we're all addicted to something, right?
Mm.
Addiction
Mm-hmm.
is just a compulsive habit that has negative consequences that we find hard to stop, right? We're all addicted to something. So it's
Mm-hmm.
really a broader spectrum than that. And so for me, I didn't have what you would call a typical, I didn't hit a desperate bottom. I didn't lose my job or
Uh,
get divorced or wind up in jail. But I just over time saw that this is not really the most effective way to live. I'd found
right.
God, or He had found me in my late 30s, and even though I rationalized my drinking for a while and shoved it in a little compartment, I started thinking, well, I'm not sure I'm being a good steward of the opportunity God has given me. And then, I started thinking forward about, do I want to get to the end of my life and think that the meaning and the significance of my life is that I did a pretty good job, but that I spent a lot of my energy and time and resources, trying to have a pretty good buzz and feel pretty good. And that was a desperately sad future to envision. So really that kind of became my bottom. Then obviously
Mm-hmm.
at similar points in time, understanding that my wife was struggling and I was being a stumbling block for her. And then
Mm-hmm.
over time to see what was going on with my son, all of those things work together. But I just want people out there to know that, just because you're high functioning and you're doing well, it doesn't mean, you don't have idols or addictions or issues in your life, because we all do,
Yeah.
we all do.
Yeah.
And once you accept that and understand that and know that, A, you're normal, you're not abnormal, and but B, there are things that you can do about it. That's really the start of either dealing with your issues and in some cases preventing them. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So once you realized that this was something that you needed to conquer, um, what was your path? What did your path look like going forward?
yeah. Well, first, I'm kind of wired like my degree was in engineering, so I'm kind of a methodical, mind first kind of a thinker. I mean, we're
Mm-hmm.
described holistically, right? We have a heart, soul, mind, and strength, but I tend to think things through first. So I started reading and studying about how do you live life well. The recovery program I wound up choosing for myself was called Celebrate Recovery, which is a Christian 12-step based program. My wife,
Mm-hmm.
she quit at the same time I did, so she chose AA, which is another 12-step program.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were the paths that we took. But I wasn't just an attendee. Like I said, I became very interested in it. I saw, well, I'll be darned, we can actually prevent some of the world's worst behavioral health issues. And the way to do it is to learn to live life better. And so I thought, well, I'll go out and research, what other books and resources that are trying to bring that message to the rest of the people. I mean, people in recovery know that, right? As you know, right, there's people who will go to recovery for decades, far past the point when drugs or alcohol are an issue, because they found that that's an effective way to develop a lifestyle that helps you spiritually, emotionally, mentally, socially, etc. So I didn't find a lot of resources on how do you take that message to the rest of the world. So
Mm-hmm.
I wrote my
Mm-hmm.
first book. It was called Steps: A Daily Journey to a Better Life. And yes, it integrates a lot of what you learn in recovery and from the Bible, but also, psychology and wellness and personal development. It just tries to portray a practical lifestyle where people can avoid some of that pain and find
Mm-hmm.
more peace, joy, and purpose along the way. So I'm going through recovery. My wife is. My son had his own journey of recovery, but I just became immersed in studying the disciplines around it. And then writing the book, I think, put me on a path, and I started blogging. And a few years later, I felt called to leave the business world and start a ministry. So that was really the path I took. So.
Okay. Well, that's really neat. I've visited several Celebrate Recovery ministries and been asked to speak at several, and it's really a great program. And I would encourage people to, if you have not been to a Celebrate Recovery meeting, to go and to check it out. In terms of parents dealing with a child who may be battling addiction, let's kind of break it down. It's a little bit different dealing with a teenager, particularly under the age of 18, versus dealing with an adult. What kind of tips would you offer for parents?
Well, I think parents can learn a lot uh, just by the thought process that I went through as we were starting steps. Is in my church, even before I founded the nonprofit, the pastors knew the path that I was on, right? And I've been kind of relatively transparent with my background. And the youth pastor came to me one time. He said, "Steve, I know the direction you're going in, but I really want to urge you, no matter what you do, please include a big focus on parents." He said, "Let me tell you why. Let me tell you what's going on." He said, "In the local high school, right? I mean, most of the kids are drinking or smoking pot, and that's not even seen as a big deal anymore. And the problem is they go from that to pills and occasionally to heroin or maybe cocaine. And then occasionally one of them is overdosing or other ones are committing suicide." He said, "That's what's going on in high schools now. And what's going on with parents is A, they're scared to death. B, they don't know what to do. And C, they're embarrassed. So they circle the wagons and don't tell anybody about it and hope that the problems go away.
Hmm.
You know, so uh, so we wound up putting on a seminar at a church on how parents can raise their kids in a way to live effectively, but also prevent some of these issues. And since then, I've talked to and worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of parents. And as you said from your history, right, a lot of times parents only wake up when it hits the crisis stage.
Yeah.
So I've heard many, many parents say 5 different statements, which I actually use to help shape, the curriculum that we do for parents. The first statement is, "We didn't think it could happen to us."
Hmm.
We didn't think it could happen to our family, right? We're good parents, right? We're not, and so this aspect of preparation is the first step in what we call paces for parents. That's the P. That people need to be prepared and have the right expectations for what that teenagers are going to change, so they need to change too. So the concept of being prepared before they get to the teenage years is important. The second statement I hear is, "We didn't know her problems were that bad." In other
Hmm.
words, it's a lack of awareness. So the A in PACES for parents is awareness, to understand parents really need to know what their kids are going through, both circumstantially, but also in their lives, right? I mean, teenagers today face a lot of anxiety and sadness and loneliness, and they all want to fit in. So helping parents know that awareness is important, but that they're going to have to work at it more than they have before. The third statement I hear is, "Well, when he became a teenager, it was just harder to connect with him anymore." So it's the concept of connection. Teenagers
Hmm.
are going to naturally move away from their parents somewhat. So parents are going to have to adjust their strategy and, listen a lot more and listen with empathy and connect and judge less and do those things. So the third step in PACES is connection. Fourth statement I heard is, "Well, when she was struggling, we didn't know what to do." You face new challenges when you go through this. Substances and addiction are a tornado that affect the whole family, and parents may not have been through that before. So they need to take the time to learn some things and get education so that they're ready to face those challenges. And finally, the fifth thing I heard, and it's perhaps the saddest, right? Because I've heard these statements from a lot of parents in crisis. Their son or daughter is really struggling. And sometimes I've talked to too many parents who've lost a son or a daughter. And the fifth one is, "We should have done something sooner, but we waited too late."
Hmm.
That'll break your heart when it's coming from a parent, who's lost a son or a daughter.
Hmm.
And the friends that my son used to hang around with when he was in high school, my son has been the pallbearer of his best friend's funeral, the guy he was with at 14 when he first drank. And he's been to 2 other funerals of his friends. You don't want to be a parent who someday says, we should have done something sooner, but we waited too late. So the S in cases is steps. Do you have a plan in place to be proactive and to anticipate what's going on? So I think those are the things I would suggest parents think about. It's and the acronym PACES could help you. Is be prepared, have the right expectation, stay aware of the world your kids live in, but also what's going on in their world. Be connected, and you're going to have to adjust your communication style. Get educated on the trials they're facing, and then steps. Have a plan in place. You don't want to wait until you get the phone call, that says an accident has happened, an overdose has happened, your son or daughter's in jail. You would rather have a plan in place to try to be a little more preemptive and preventative if you can. So those, I think, perhaps are some of the tips.
Yeah, those are great tips. Those are great tips. And, having been a parent who's walked through that, who's been on that journey, we do tend to rationalize early on. And sometimes we think, oh, especially if it's your oldest, your firstborn, you're thinking, well, maybe this is just what teenagers go through, this, and sometimes the behavior is very similar, it's what you would expect of a teenager, right? But you tend to continue to rationalize, and it creeps up on you, but it can happen so fast. And then the next thing you know, you're, like you said, you're dealing with a crisis situation.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
just mean you'd much rather, right, be having a conversation like, well, you caught your son or daughter drinking for the first or second time, or they're
Mhm.
trying out vaping, or maybe they've experimented with pot. I mean, to many parents, they don't think that can happen. Well, guess what? Those things are going to happen with most kids.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
you'd rather deal with a crisis at that level than with one to say your daughter was in an accident and someone has died, or you know they've they've overdosed. She took a pill that a friend gave her that she thought was going to help her feel more calm at a party, and it was laced with fentanyl. And I'm afraid your daughter has passed away. Right? You want to be getting involved in the earlier phases. Maybe it's a small crisis, or maybe you're just seeing that they're anxious, or they're lonely, or they're depressed, or they seem to desperately need to fit in. Try to get involved in your kids' lives at those stages.
Tell us a little bit more, Steve, about your ministry, where people can find you online, and how your ministry helps people, all the different facets of how you're helping people.
Yeah. Well, I get we produce content and resources and education for parents and other people with three goals: to help people live life better, grow closer to God, and prevent addiction and life-changing crises. And I think you can do all those at the same time, right? So we're not trying to create new wisdom in the world, right? We do a lot of research on best practices that have been proven to work over a period of time for many, many people, right? So we research in recovery, and as I said, psychology and neuroscience and the Bible and wellness and personal development. And we pick those things that best fit teenagers, and then show parents how they can educate their kids on it. So we try to make it very easy to understand, so you can read a short article or watch a video or listen to a podcast. Or we deliver these things called online toolkits, which are very easy to consume. A parent can just discover biblical parenting, or parenting teenagers, or parenting in a crisis, or dealing with anxiety. A lot of practical situations that make the material easy to understand and very practical to use. And they can find those at lifeimprovementsteps.com. Again, that's lifeimprovementsteps.com. And we are continuing to put that material together into more and more ways that people can consume it and use it. So hopefully people will find something that could help. And yeah, they won't know till they try. Just go and look around, and I bet they'll find something that can help.
Yeah, I was just looking at your website, and it looks great, and I like your concepts here. And I shared with you earlier before we started recording that I really started out in the prevention space,
Yeah,
and really did not have a clear path forward, and didn't
yeah,
understand, you know, because I didn't really have a clear understanding of addiction still at that point, and it was kind of I was kind of taking the approach of like, look, this is my story, and this is what happened, and don't do this because it's not
yeah,
going to turn out good. And I'm sure I helped a lot of people through that, but it wasn't as effective as it could have been. And I was looking for answers, and that my journey has taken me to where I am now. As I was
Yeah,
searching for answers. But I'm so glad that you're working in this space and that you're getting ahead of the problem to the extent possible. That you're doing your
yeah,
best to do that, and to educate parents, to help educate the kids, because and I think this is a Ben Franklin quote: "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure."
yeah,
And so I'm
yeah,
I'm all about that, and I really want to
yeah,
support what you're doing in your ministry,
yeah.
and get the word out there. Are you taking your ministry into churches or schools, or a combination of both? And do you speak
Yeah.
in those types of venues?
Yes, to all of those. We do a lot with churches, right? Because I mean, an organization, most churches, right, care a lot about their members and their families, right? So they have a vested interest. They probably have a youth group. They care about families. They care about parents, right? So we do a lot with churches. We also, will work with companies and with other nonprofits. I mean, we're a 501(c)(3) nonprofit, right? We're just trying to help people, and we're very willing to share content through other organizations, and we can do it very easily. We can build a web page for an organization, again, a nonprofit, a church, or a company. We call it a content portal, and they can
Hmm.
choose what resources they want to apply. It can be parenting resources, it can be parenting teenagers, it can be dealing with emotional wellness or anxiety. It can be understanding recovery and addiction, but it also can be just on things like improving relationships and living more intentionally and being productive.
Hmm.
So we try to help parents and churches and other groups see that they can add value to someone's life, right? They can help them be a better person and be a better employee, church member, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, friend, everything, right? They can help them live life better. And by so doing, perhaps they can help them adjust their trajectory so that they don't have one of these life altering kind of crises later.
Right, right. Um, I know we've talked about your acronym, and we talked about the Steps Ministry some. Is there anything else that you can offer to people in terms of tips on just how to grow spiritually, how to deepen their faith in God, and just how to live life more intentionally?
Well, I'm not going to try to acronym people to death, but the answer that occurred to me as you asked that question was, the methodology I just mentioned, PACES, is the one we developed for parents. When I wrote
Hmm.
the first book, it's called Steps, right? Steps is also an acronym, and it
Hmm.
tries to distill the spiritual and practical wisdom I saw in recovery that is supported by a lot of other disciplines. And if you take those five things, I think they kind of give you five clues on how to live life effectively. And that starts by having an appropriate spiritual understanding and knowing that there is a God who created us and loved us, right? So that's the key. But God designed us, He asked us to love Him with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, right? He designed us as holistic, integrated beings. So a lot of the way we experience life has a spiritual component, but also an emotional component, a mental component, a social component, and then we have our will, so a personal component. So the first book, Steps, is an acronym, and the S is for surrender. It means, even if you look at the first three steps in the 12 steps you study in recovery, right? It's about understanding that there is a God who's bigger than us and God is in control. And to see that the most unbelievably unbelievable breakthrough to find more peace and joy in our life when we let go of our infatuation with control and surrender control. So surrender is key. The 10 steps is for transformation. We're all flawed human beings, right? We all have issues. We all sin. We all have addictions, right? So, but it's healthy to recognize what they are and then take steps to work on those things, right? So it's really about a humble, healthy awareness that then becomes proactive on taking steps in those areas. So the 10 steps is for transformation. The E is where spiritually we are developed to live in community, right? And we see a lot of concepts like love and forgiveness and compassion and service. Those are all relational attributes, right? And they start from what the E is in step, which is empathy, right? Which is really connecting with the fact that other people are struggling and to understand where they are and try to meet them where they are. That's how we can move in that direction. So you got the S, T, and E, and then the P is kind of the spiritual discernment of, we're just going to live life better if we have daily and weekly disciplines or habits that we follow. So we
Hmm.
have a daily quiet time where we stay in contact with God and pray and meditate and hopefully spend some time in the Bible and then maybe examine ourselves and say, today, what can I work on to get better? So that's what the P, which is for progress. And then the S is for surrender. Excuse me, is for service. We are blessed to have this opportunity to live life. And I think a part of how we are designed is to be of service, is to give back to other people. So
Hmm.
that surrender, transformation, empathy, progress, and service are all kind of a discernment, I think, of some spiritual principles that also can be very practical to help us live life better.
Well, I have to tell you, being a former military guy, I love acronyms. Like you talk about acronyms, man. I've never seen so many acronyms in my life as when I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
in the military. And I
yeah,
frequently would have to ask people, what does that mean? There's always another acronym, but they are good for helping us remember important things. So yeah, I love the direction that you're going with everything. I love you're in the prevention space, Steve, and it's so important. It's so important because we have been over the past few years losing a lot of young people to drug and alcohol addiction, to overdoses, other drug-related issues. It's very important that we do everything we can to educate parents and the children to prevent those sort of things. And there's opportunity there, obviously, to be able to reach a lost world, for God and to help people develop that relationship with God through Jesus, and to be saved. Because, I'm all about saving lives, physical lives and helping people grow. But what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his own soul? So we definitely have to reach people on a spiritual level and help them come to that understanding that this life is short and we're
yeah,
all we're all leaving this life at some point, and
yeah,
it's really important to have all of that worked out
yeah,
so that no matter what happens,
yeah.
you're going to spend life in eternity with God in heaven. Do you have any final thoughts on that before
Yeah. Well,
wrap it
I
up?
mentioned before, right, that God designed us as holistic human beings, but there's only
Mm,
one supernatural component in that, right? And that is the fact that, there is an Almighty God who created us and created us individually, and that He loves us and He will pull us toward Him if we only
mm,
listen and respond to His call. So we integrate the spiritual component as it's really the wild card lives, right? It's the one supernatural component, but very often it seems like you know God designed us, right? And I think it can honor Him if we're also working on the mental aspects of it. How do we make the choices? How do we deal with our thoughts and the emotional components? Are we a victim of our emotions, or do we understand how to deal with them? And the social components. We focus just on ourselves, or how do we interact with other people, and the personal component. Are we random and impulsive and compulsive, or are we kind of more on purpose and intentional? But there's only there's a lot of churches out there who are trying to save people, and God bless every single one of them. It's the most important mission that there is in this world, and a lot of recovery organizations, and we're trying to help bring recovery and bring God to people where they are, so they can hopefully, I think a lot of just like what's the old saying that there's no atheist in the foxhole,
that's right.
and
Yeah.
in recovery, a lot of people are open to the fact that
Mm,
they've seen that they've lost control of their lives.
hmm.
And
Hmm.
now to understand that there's a loving creator who's there for them, to help them guide them and make some different choices and move out of that space. So
Mm,
that's a life-saving breakthrough. So
mm-hmm,
sometimes it takes a crisis for people to see that.
yeah,
But hopefully, others kind of figure it out along the way as well.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Great points. Steve, so your website is life improvements, lifeimprovementsteps.com, right?
yeah,
Lifeimprovementsteps.com.
correct.
Okay.
Plural at the end. Lifeimprovementsteps.com.
Okay. Okay. Great. And so if you're listening or watching on video, if you would go check out lifeimprovementsteps.com, go to that web address, you can find information on Steve's ministry there and more about what he's doing. And tell us really quickly, Steve, too, about your books, where people can find your books.
They can find them there.
Okay.
I've got 6 in process and 2 that have been published, but also I would urge them to look at the sections and look at again these online toolkits under proactive parenting or behavioral health or just improving your life. That's a quicker and easy way to get engaged, but the books are there, and there'll be more resources coming all along. So
Okay. Okay. Well, good. Steve, I've really enjoyed talking with you today. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast as a guest, and I hope that we can have the opportunity to talk more in the future and collaborate a little bit.
there, I look forward to it. There's it's a hard world out there, right? And fentanyl has become the number one cause of death starting at age 18. You know,
Hmm.
there's a lot of drama out there, and if people don't understand that, that we're going to keep having people die, or people just ruin their lives. So sometimes it takes an intervention to. Hopefully, people can also start to make better choices along the way. But I love what you're doing. Look forward to working with you in the future, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for tuning in to When God Intervenes. If you found today's episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Your feedback helps us reach more families in need of hope and healing. For more resources and support, visit our website at thefamilyrecoverycoach.com. Until next time, stay strong and keep the faith.